Good afternoon and welcome to Small Business Live. This afternoon we're going live with Sile Walsh, MSc, HDip, AoCS. Sheila specialises in leadership and organisational development, focusing on inclusion, psychological safety and performance. So I'm going to add her in and then we can get started. Okay. Here she comes. Hi Sheila, nice to meet you.
It's good to meet you too. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Do you have nice weather today? We've had horrible storms.
No, we've had pretty bad weather, but today is a little bit still. I'm in Dublin, so it's a little bit stiller today than it was over the last few days.
That's good to hear. Yeah, hopefully it's clearing up now.
And who's our little co-star in the back?
Oh, it's a lioness, and I've also got the dog who's, yeah. I'm just having an accidental fall there on the light.
These things happen.
Yeah, it's one of those things that happens quite often. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do? And yes.
Sure. It's like the dreaded question. You'd think that the amount of times I have to answer about myself and what I do. I suppose it's quicker to start at this end rather than the start. So I specialise in inclusion and inclusive leadership, and I'm doing a PhD in inclusive leadership, and I'm writing a book about it. And I do a lot of consulting with from very small organisations to right up to global organisations around how they can improve performance and inclusion using some kind of inclusion practices and behaviours and approaches and policies, so that they can actually improve the performance of individuals, teams and organisations. And my background is kind of varied between coaching psychology and organisational development, and that's kind of how they've come together now into utilising them for inclusive leadership and inclusive organisations. So yeah, that's the boring stuff. I like coffee. I love being an aunt, and one of the main reasons I set up my business over 12 years ago was because I wanted to travel for work and I wanted to continue to learn, and I couldn't find a career that let me do both. So running my own business gave me both of those, more than I could have asked for, actually.
Okay, that sounds fun. So do you travel globally, or do you work with small and medium enterprises and large corporations globally, or was it's mainly in Ireland and the UK? Tell us about that.
Yes, so I generally am based within the EU or the UK or Ireland, generally speaking, but a lot of the teams I work with could be anywhere. So sometimes I might be on site outside of the EU, and I might end up in a different part of the world, because it just depends where the global organisation places the in-person event, and that's where I might end up to do a piece of work. But then I work online across all kind of regions. So it sounds really lovely. And it was like the fantasy of it. I was thinking about this when I was a kid. I used to be like, oh, I'd love to be doing that. But actually, it's while it is really good and I really love it, it's a lot of work to take into account cultural differences, different ideas of what good looks like, different ways, different languages. I'm no good at anything but English, so it's the only thing I can do work in. And so yeah, so yeah, I think it sounds lovely, and it is lovely. And also, I didn't take into account maybe all of the additional extras that kind of way of working brings with them.
It sounds really rewarding and like a really necessary piece of work, particularly at the moment when the world's a bit frenzied. But so it's a little bit jealous, actually. It sounds really fun. From the dealing with different people and the learning and working with the leadership side of things. So how did you come to join leadership and inclusion and diversity together in one role?
Yeah. So I suppose I'm dyslexic, and I have another kind of, I could put a load of labels on the table about differences, and I suppose I've always kind of worked outside of the norm just because of my dyslexia and the way I understand the world and my experience. So inclusion for me hasn't been this thing that came about because it's become popular. It's always just been, I was aware that systems were designed for some people and not others, and so any work I did, I always thought about how do we get the most value from people? How do we get the most from people? And making everyone work the same way doesn't always get that. So that's always just been part of my world, because I didn't succeed very well in school. I didn't thrive, didn't like it. So that's always just been an approach. I've always thought there's always a way, figure it out kind of approach. And then the leadership piece is a bit of it was an accident, in the sense that I was working with lots of different people in coaching. A specific amount of them were leaders, and it became more repetitive that I was working with leaders. So I kind of ended up working mostly with leaders and supporting them in their personal and professional life. And then as I kind of continued to study and things, it just became more and more focused on leaders. Now, when I was thinking about my PhD, I rang a few people, because that's kind of what I'm like. I like to collect data. And I rang a few people and said, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on that? And one person said to me, whatever you do, do not do another piece of research about leadership that tells us the same thing we already know. And I was like, oh. And she goes, and don't tell us how we can create more inclusive organisations. Do you know what? She's like, do you know what I want to know? Tell me how I can help leaders be more inclusive, because that's what they need to do for the future of work. And I was like, oh, okay. She's really sure. And then I hung up and I went, that kind of makes perfect sense. So why don't I go and investigate that? Because I'm already working in leadership. I already utilise inclusive kind of insights and practices and principles. That makes perfect sense. And then it just kind of narrowed, because the more I looked, the more I figured out, there's all sorts of different agendas in inclusive leadership and in inclusion. And I started to think about if they were part of what I wanted to be part of, or there was something else I wanted to do. So to be honest, I would say I kind of fell into these areas, as opposed to, the way some people are really good at picking their future. I don't know if you were good at that, like picking the thing and going for it. I'm not. I just kind of went, oh, that's really interesting. And then the next thing and the next thing. Now I'm here, being really interested in these things.
I'm more of the pick this thing for now, I'll pick another thing next week.
Yeah.
But it's quite interesting how people who didn't enjoy school and didn't particularly do well at school, etc., end up being so passionate about learning and being so involved in learning. I find that quite fascinating. Everybody that I speak to who works in learning in some way didn't particularly enjoy school. So.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really important point, because I think there's a difference between being taught and learning. Like, I loved learning. I just wasn't learning effectively in school. I wasn't learning things I liked, and I wasn't learning in ways. I do think that people who maybe school wasn't where we thrived tend to be really curious about how to make things easier. And I tend to find that people who didn't do great in school are much clearer about the learning and development that they help others with. They simplify, they don't fluff it up for the sake of it. They think about impact, they keep it practical. And I do think that a lot of that comes down to kind of knowing what didn't work for you, as well as knowing what would have been helpful.
Yeah, very much so. So I wanted to ask you a bit about what does it mean, I guess, when your profile that I've shared, that you work with, be committed to being trauma informed. What does that mean to the rest of us?
Yes,
I read it and then I'm not quite sure how to explain it.
Yeah, and I think it's a good question, because a lot of people are talking about being like trauma practitioners, trauma informed, trauma coaches, and I think it can create a little bit of a kind of like, what does that actually mean? So trauma informed, there's lots of different models, but basically for me it means I assume that people consciously and unconsciously have experienced trauma, and that might impact how they interact in the work. And in coaching, a lot of coaching is about like setting goals and helping people get places. And one of the things I have found is if you're working with someone who's had experiences that have stunted them or harmed them or built up fear in them, then getting them to push through is actually harmful and not helpful. But also that appreciating that people are carrying things we don't know anything about. And so for me, being trauma informed is about kind of leaning on a couple of principles, like everything should be a choice. We don't do things to people, we give them choices. We consider psychological safety. We think about the kind of most empowered way that things can be done. We don't tell people, we ask them, we invite them. And it just kind of means that when I'm working, I'm not thinking about what I think you need to do. I'm thinking about what do you need in order to do that thing. And so if I was to really summarize what it looks like in the work, is I'm thinking about what people need. to be able to achieve the things they want to achieve, and not just they should do, which is kind of, and I don't even believe it's really a coaching thing. I think it's a particular style of coaching that kind of gets preoccupied with the behavior. I'm thinking about, well, there's probably a really good reason you're not doing it. Will we think about what you need so that you can do the thing you want to do? And I guess that's kind of just from my background of working in fields where I was working with a lot of people with lots of different types of trauma. And so if you take a trauma-informed lens, you just do less harm. It doesn't mean I unpack trauma. It doesn't mean I do trauma work. I simply consider what might help people feel safe and work with what they need in order to make the decisions they need to make and to take the actions. So it's a really important part of my work is not getting stuck in that kind of forcing, pushing kind of space, or shaming or blaming, or thinking that there's only one right way to do things. To actually consider people are pretty resilient. They got here. They might be carrying a lot more than they know and a lot more than you know. So just to kind of have that respect for how that might show up in the work as a coach.
So it sounds like something that all leaders should become committed to understanding, and maybe part of their leadership or management training should include being trauma informed and just approaching people in a different way. And I've certainly worked for some managers who are probably closer to dictators than leaders. So and I certainly would have been helpful in those situations. I've seen them do some real damage to people. So it's very, yeah, it's very well explained. Thank you. It makes a difference to understand it properly. So thank you for that. So then you told me that you wanted to start your business because you wanted to travel. Were there any other catalysts for that?
Oh yeah, there was loads. That was only one. I was working with, I would say, the best boss I've ever worked with. I was interning with him and I was doing lots of different things. I was really bad at the job, by the way. Like, my job was to count stock, and every time I counted the stock, it was a different number. Like, I'm dyslexic. That was not clever. But I was really good at this customer service element and the kind of customer service process. So I was able to actually save us money and make us money. And I realised, oh, you're kind of good at this stuff, Sheila. That's interesting. And I had been to India and done some training in Ayurvedic medicine. And I actually had left school to be a chef. So I had some cooking in my background. And I was like, these are interesting things, but, you know, people are getting stuck and people are struggling sometimes. So I was doing these trainings because I'm very curious. I kept going to training because I was like, oh, that's an interesting thing. I'll learn that thing. And I was doing this, and then eventually you have to do a lot of like free hours, or like, you know, you must build up your case studies. And so I had to do that for free to build up case studies. And while I was doing that, people started referring their friends to me. And I was like, oh, sure, I don't really do it. Like, I'm only doing this because it's cheaper to learn how to do it than to pay for the service. And so this is kind of, and I was like, that's interesting. And one day I said to him, I said, look, what would I have to do to set up a business? I had no idea what I was doing. And he was like, oh, you'd have to register, and then you have to like do a profit and loss. And I was like, what's a profit and loss? So he sat me down and he showed me the parts that I was oblivious to. And then he helped me put my first business plan together. So I applied because I was like, they're never going to give me that. And then, so the business was started, but also there was funding at the time if you opened a business. So I was like, they're not going to give me that. But they did, they funded it. So I was like, oh, well, now I run a business apparently. So then that was the start of me going, right, well, what do I want to do with it? I knew it was going to be in service to people and be helpful, but also I hadn't really found my strengths really. Like, I was really good as an excellent pastry chef, but I didn't love it. I was great at helping. I worked with a couple of CEOs and owners. I was great at helping them, but it wasn't my zone. It was helping them in their zone. And so I kind of spent the first couple of years figuring that out, kind of being like, oh, well, what do I want to learn, and doing different courses. Whereas it was the only way I could afford to do different courses, you know, because it was part of my work as opposed to this additional thing that I had at the time been doing. And then the other thing was the way that I work, there wasn't a role for it in Ireland at the time. There wasn't like a job advertisement. There is starting to be now, but there wasn't. And so I was like, well, I can wait for someone to give me a job and possibly give it to someone else, or I can kind of create the job and see what happens. And I kind of thought I'd get to the second year and then close it. It hasn't closed yet, and I've had a couple of scares in that process. Like, COVID happened, and I actually took on the PhD during COVID because I was like, oh, the business is going to fold, like, definitely during COVID. And I lost a lot of work within 24 hours of the first lockdown here. And then over 6 weeks, I not only gained that work back, I gained about a third more. So now I had a business with a third more work than I'd expected and a PhD to continue. So like, I suppose I've kind of always been like, you know, what value can I add and where can I thrive? And if I can learn and I can travel and I can work with people, I thrive in that environment. So it kind of was an accident again. I kind of just kept taking it going, yeah, 2 years I'll close it then. But it just kind of went from strength to strength. And so I just kept pursuing my curiosity. There's a quote in, I think it's called Big Magic by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she says, if you don't know where to start with what you're interested in. Like, just be curious. And when I look back, that's what I was doing. I knew it was related to people. I knew I wanted to improve the experience people were having. I knew I was good with people. I knew I was not good at counting stock. You know, so it was just this kind of like gathered momentum, and it's led me in a really good direction now. If you'd said 8 years ago where I was going to end up, I wouldn't have believed you. I would have been like, that's not really, I don't think so. Because I just kept following my curiosity and doing the things that I thought were important. And I kept thinking, how do I add value? How am I of service? That kept coming. That was like a really key piece for me, is don't just add a service or add something to the world, add something that might help. And so that's kind of the kind of unconscious motivations that I didn't know at the time, but are much clearer now. All of that was kind of trying to find my place, I guess.
Good. That leads me nicely to the next question of, if you had one piece of advice for somebody who was looking to set up their business, what would it be?
Wow, I have loads. I have loads of rants. I would say the first thing is realize that setting up a business means you better be really good at disappointment and learn to take rejection like you take your coffee, move on from it, like it's over, it's done. If you can roll with it and if you can roll with it, it'll go well. And adapt, like don't just roll with it and keep knocking on, roll with it, learn, adapt. But it is the most and I've been going to therapy since I was about 17, and it is the most personal development I've ever done was setting up and running a business. And to this day, including attending therapy, it is way more intense than any other thing that I've done. And you can do that and suffer, or you can do that and get your support. So I would say get the supports, but remember that it's meant to be hard, at least in the beginning. Otherwise, everybody would do it. So you need your resilience in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely the toughest personal development adventure you'll ever go on, and I don't think most people understand that. It's very easy for us to go out and say, oh, you just need a laptop and a phone to set up a business, but actually that's not even the half of it. So yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. It can be really, really hard sometimes.
Yeah, and I would say it's worth it, but I would say that if you're expecting to only do the highs that you see on Instagram or on Facebook that other people share, you're going to really struggle. So know that those sharings are about 5% of the reality. And that's true for all of us. The stuff we share is about only 5%. Yep. It's the worry at 1 o'clock because you realize you did something that didn't work very well, or you put money into something and that was not a good idea, or you've taken on too much. Like that's the 95% is figuring that stuff out. So I just think not to set yourself up to fail.
Yeah, I think another one that's come out of the whole thing is understanding that actually you're not that visible. So when you make mistakes, there aren't actually that many people watching you. People are not all standing there just waiting for you to fail. So just get on with it.
Yeah, and also even if they are, like, that's what they're doing with their time.
Exactly.
Like,
you can't change that. So
no, and I think that's a good point though, because I would say you won't win everybody over. They're not all for you. It's not a popularity contest. It's not about who likes you. It's about who you can help. And so there are some people aren't for you, and you can spend your time worrying about that, or you can spend your time serving the people who you can work with and serve and support. So yeah, I definitely think that's important.
Great. Okay, so do you want to tell me a bit about your products and services that you offer and how people can get hold of you for those?
Yeah, so it's myname.com is the website, so silewalsh.com. I do leadership coaching. I have a book club that I run, which is kind of easier to get into, weekly leadership letters. And I also have the leadership, sorry, what is it? The Inclusive Leaders Pocket Guide, which is a free download. And I am publishing a book in April called Inclusive Leadership, Navigating Organisational Complexity. So I'm up to my eyeballs in trying to do that.
And what size of organisations do you work with? Usually
so I do some small consulting with kind of smaller mediums. A lot of the work I do is bigger because it's usually bigger workforces. So it anywhere from a medium to a large. But I would just do more interventions. When I work with smaller organisations, it's more consulting. So I go in, we do it in less time, and they do it, and I help them figure out what to do.
Okay.
Whereas in larger companies, I might be actually delivering it with their internal teams or with my own team. So I kind of work across them, and it does help me keep an eye on differences between patterns. Whereas if I only specialise in one, you can kind of lose a broader view of the work. So I do it differently across different size organisations is the best way to say it.
So something like a small HR consultancy who, like an HR company who provides HR to various small businesses might bring you in to help them, to help the businesses they work with.
Exactly. Or a CEO, usually for smaller, like in the smaller medium size, the CEO would contact me and say, look, I'm not sure what to do. And I'd go in and have a conversation with them, and we decide what would be the best bang for the buck. So like, what actually will get you the impact you need? What does that look like? And it might not be all of the stuff you thought up front or all of the things you've seen other people do. So we kind of do a quick kind of assessment and audit of what would be helpful. And then we focus on what would have the biggest impact for what is needed. So it really depends. Usually I just have a conversation with someone first, and then from there we kind of figure out what might be helpful in terms of moving forward.
Okay, great. I will put all your contact information in the notes below so that people can get hold of you, either through your website, email, DM, etc. I'll put that all on. It's going to go onto LinkedIn as well, so I'll link you in on that.
Thank you.
But are there any exciting, besides your book, because you've mentioned that one, but are there any exciting upcoming projects that you want people to know about?
I suppose the more kind of recent one will be the Leadership Book Club. So we meet kind of every 6 weeks. We have a call on a Monday evening, kind of 7 p.m. UK Irish time. But what's interesting about that is we put a lot of work into picking books that are outside of the mainstream. So they're books that maybe you wouldn't have come across or people aren't using. And we have a very important conversation during the book club, not just about the book, but the application to our own leadership. So it's kind of like a mini dose of leadership development. And that has room at the moment for 2 more members. So it's a very small group. It's very niche. But it's actually one of the loveliest things I do in the year. And the participants say the same. They're like, this is so important because it's just has such rich conversations during it. The book sparks us, but it's not really about the book when we actually end up meeting. It's about what we use, what we don't use. So I suppose that would be the best way. If somebody was looking for some kind of connection and support and development, really low cost, really easy to access, but really rich, then that would probably be the best place to start.
Yeah, that sounds really great. Right. Thank you very much. It's lovely to meet you. Love your accent too, by the way.
I was going to say the same to you because I saw the flags and I was like, where is your, I don't want to misplace your accent. So where's your accent
South
from?
Africa.
Okay. I thought that, but then I was like, I don't trust my accent telling. Okay. But you're in the UK, are you?
I am, yes. I'm in Berkshire. Yeah.
Okay. Fabulous.
Yeah. Dublin's a favourite. Our whole family loves Dublin. All of us have been multiple times, so great place. Yes. Thank you very much for your time. It's been lovely speaking with you, and I look forward to engaging with you further.
And thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye.